Hello, everyone. Stucky here.
And I'm Gabby.
And welcome back to the podcast, my hoes. Welcome back. And I'm going to tell you all this right now. I'm very excited for some of the stuff that we have coming up. So in May, we are going to be going to Italy. That whole trip is completely done. So if you're wanting to join us for a trip, then you're going to need to either hop on Peru while there's still time, or the trip that we have here to Germany just launched. And there are still a couple spots that are available for the $200 discount. Past that, it will go up by $200 to $2,800. So if you want to get in on that while you can, join us because we're going to be having a ton of fun. And speaking Christmas, let's talk about Christ.
Wow, what a segue.
No, that was, okay, not going to lie. That was genuinely probably one of the better segues that I've had of literally anything that I've done, because we're going to be talking about something here that is papal history.
It's so funny that you would write a papal history podcast, right? As I was writing a papal history podcast.
I was inspired. It's one of those things here again, but it's different.
Oh,
right?
Were you inspired? Okay, so I'm writing one for my podcast on papal scandals. And I asked him, what was the investiture controversy? Is that what inspired you?
Literally it was.
Wow.
So I'm like, you know what? You're doing a whole bunch of different things. I'm going to do an entire deep dive into the investiture controversy. Which, for anyone who is unfamiliar with that, there was a time in which the church was significantly weaker than what it would become. Like, you know how we think of the Catholic Church and like the big dominant power, like the big church in the medieval period?
Yes.
For a decent amount of its beginning, it was actually much weaker than we give it credit for. Though it's very interesting. Okay. And I know that when I go into this, that we're going to be talking about another thing that is European history. We've done a lot of that from stuff that is just what it is that we had written or ideas or things that were planned. But we have a whole bunch of other plans of other areas of the world that we're going to be covering next. Like this next week's episode that I plan on doing is going to be Ibn Battuta, who is essentially the Moroccan Marco Polo. It is a very fun little story to go into. And it gets kind of wild because, little spoiler alert, he didn't write down any of the stuff that he actually did himself. He talked about his adventures orally to another guy who then wrote it down. So you can bet that there's going to be a whole bunch of embellished stuff that is pretty wild. Anyway, the investiture controversy. This is also something that's referred to as the investiture contest, or just the dispute, right? This is something that was a conflict that went from the late 11th century, like 1076 or so, all the way until the early 1100s, like 1122. And this would occur between the papacy, like the Catholic Church, and the Holy Roman Empire. Or rather, I should say that in comparison to the full Holy Roman Empire, it was specifically the dynasty of German monarchs that ruled the Holy Roman Empire, the Salian dynasty, which for anyone who remembers when we did our podcast episode on the HRE specifically, this is what I'm talking about here, like Otto. The papal conflict, the issue between the imperial house and the papacy, this was something that was focused entirely around on the appointment of bishops, priests, people who like monks, these kinds of things, like the officials who would have been working in the church. This was a practice that was called lay investiture. Now, Gabby, you went to a religious school, but I obviously know that the school that you attended was not Catholic. Yes.
Nope.
So I don't know what it is that you would have actually learned at that point in time about what specifically would have been happening here at this point. But I'm pretty sure that your school, since it wasn't Catholic, would have looked at this as one of the key examples of corruption that would have existed within the Catholic Church.
Potentially.
Yes. So the thing is, it kind of was. Or rather, I should say this was a blatant political move that was that was very obviously not something that was religious related and would create a bunch of problems for the Catholic Church. Good for the rulers, not for the church.
So in the podcast episode that I was writing, basically the popes in and of themselves becoming pope within that little like time frame essentially meant that you would probably lose your mind. And they cycled through about 7 popes from 896 to like 904.
Yeah.
Because becoming pope, everybody, it was so political, right?
Correct.
That
because it was all based around the same families.
As soon as you took this position, it was just intrigue. Like people were trying to kill you. People were trying to get you to side with them. The popes literally lost their minds.
Yeah, no, I would bet because a whole bunch of them end up getting like literally assassinated. That is something that happened a whole bunch.
I mean, in addition to being assassinated, they did do a lot of dumb stuff. A lot of them were so corrupt. Yeah, love that. It was going well for them.
The thing is that it wasn't just the papacy that was running into the same kind of issues. See, the idea of lay investiture is that the church wasn't actually the thing that had the power to go and appoint bishops, priests, and other officials, right? Lay investiture is where the king, like, or specifically the emperor, like the Holy Roman Emperor, that was the person that was going to be able to select the bishops or the archbishops, like the people who were going to be on the ground and providing all the religious services for an area. And this was a huge amount of power that a secular ruler could have instead of just the Pope. Like the idea of a bishop being not loyal to the Pope, but instead being loyal to that secular ruler, that was massive. And so the dispute that we're talking about here was something that was very ideological. It existed for decades that would go on between all the varying popes, like the Gregorys, the Henrys. Well, Henry was actually one of the emperors.
Is this where there was the Pope and then the anti-Pope?
Sort of, kind of. Yes,
Because
an anti-pope was raised.
when I was writing my episode, there were so many points where, oh yeah, he became Pope, but then this other guy also got appointed Pope by this other group. And then also there was an anti-Pope.
Oh, just wait. Yes, there's going to be some anti-popes. When you get to one of these parts, I'm pretty sure this is something that probably came up in one of your examples of just a controversy when this happens.
Probably more than if it was controversial. I was on it.
But the story that we're talking about is going to have massive ramifications, political, religious, everything for literally centuries afterwards. This is huge. So, okay, background to all this. We need to go back to the beginning of the HRE, sort of. And when I say HRE, I mean not all the way back to Charlemagne. I mean the reign of Otto I, the Holy Roman Emperor who would rule from 962 to 973 of the Ottonian dynasty. This was a guy who was a massive religious patron. He was someone who really wanted to promote his influence over the church. And when he did this, like all the donations that he would give, this is something that would spawn something called the Ottonian Renaissance, essentially. What he did is that after he was coronated, very quickly after, he went and completely restructured how things were supposed to work inside of his kingdom, like in the secular side of things, and how things were going to work on the religious side with the papacy. And he claimed to have the right to create new entire like fiefs, like these little, essentially the imperial territories within the empire, and to install handpicked lords or bishops. It didn't matter whether they were secular, whether they were religious, whatever. He could go and create these himself to try and manage the lands and serve under him. He would create a bunch of these bishoprics, which are that's literally like a lord, but it's a bishop. He would create monasteries, he would create convents, he would create schools, all kinds of things. And this was huge to boosting Christianity's presence and simultaneously boosting his own power. Beyond that, Otto and the people that would follow after him would continuously consolidate their control by intervening in the church. Because remember, this is lay investiture. They are able to appoint who is actually the person in charge. So let's say that they, want to do a certain thing, and the bishop of an area goes up to him and goes, Mr. Emperor, you're not supposed to be doing that. That goes against the teachings of the church. You know what he could do?
What could he do?
You're no longer a bishop, buddy.
Wait, hold on. Is this like Otto the Great? Like Otto with Pope John? You know John the 12th?
In the 12th century? Yeah.
962?
Yeah, 962, yes.
Oh my gosh, I do know this one.
Yes. So, as you can probably imagine, this guy, he didn't want to ever take no to take the answer of no. He just would do whatever it is that he wanted, and he specifically was the guy who was appointing all these bishops, so they pretty much let him do whatever it is that he wanted, That's just kind of how it happened. And that selection and appointment process of lay investiture, that was something that was going to completely overwrite the ability of the popes and the archbishops and the others to do the same, because they could not interfere with the secular rule of law that he established, at least for a time. Fast forward a little bit of time, and you have the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry III, who is the second Salian emperor. And he was pretty famous for being a very religious guy, especially his public displays of being super religious and all of his piety. Also, the fact that he intervened a lot in the church, which was pretty much every Holy Roman Emperor.
Well, the thing is, if we go back to Otto, right? Because what I was writing in my episode was essentially that Otto got Pope John, Pope John got Otto's help to stave off the King of Italy.
Correct.
And through doing that, he had to appoint him, crown him Emperor of the HRE.
Yes,
and
exactly.
from then on, even though John's subjects were pissed because they made another German in charge of the HRE, basically it was too late and Otto had all of his power. And then John, he kind of lost. Yeah, he lost a lot.
Yes, he did. And that's the thing. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
They removed Pope John and put Pope Leo in charge of the church. Yeah.
And what ends up happening from that scenario is it creates a double-edged sword because it creates a reciprocal relationship where the Holy Roman Emperor has to be crowned by the Pope, but the Pope can only exist by being supported by the Emperor. So it creates this very toxic relationship between the two where they both need each other.
But they want the other person to do exactly their will.
Exactly. And as time goes on, the church really starts to push back on that.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the investiture controversy of what we're going to be getting into. So Henry III, he goes and appoints bishops in Aquileia, in Milan, in Ravenna, in Italy. And when he does this, it ends up pissing off a lot of people, right? Because we're not exactly pissing off a lot of people at this exact point, but he does these things. And then immediately afterwards, there is the Synod of Sutri, something which he had to personally go down into Italy, and he had to intervene in a papal dispute between, you asked about anti-popes, 3 different rival papal claimants. Was this one of the things that you went into on your side here, Gab?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm kind of glad here because I'm going to go ahead and explain it then because, oh my God, was this thing a massive mess. Okay, so that Synod of Sutri that I was talking about, that was or Sutri, actually not even sure how I'd pronounce that. This was a council that was called in order to resolve the massive disorder within the papacy. So there was a faction in the church that wanted Henry III to intervene to try and fix the conflict. And also at this time, he needed to come down and get actually crowned by the Pope in an official ceremony. So in autumn of 1046, Henry III, who at this point was not king of the Romans, he was just king of the Germans, he went down south, he crossed the Alps with a large army, accompanied by his own private retinue of secular lords and also the bishops, like the lord bishops that served under him, the varying princes of the empire. And he had 2 goals in mind from this. One, he wanted to be crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor, not just king by the Pope in Rome. And also the bigger problem from that is that he really needs to make sure that the guy who was in charge, the Pope, was not someone that was going to end up being questioned. He needed to have a firm grasp and control of that title because if he got appointed Pope, or not appointed Pope.
If he got crowned Holy Roman Emperor, but then the Pope got overthrown and then they were like, oh, well, we're just going to throw out everything he ever did. Like what they did to Formosus, remember?
Literally, yes.
Then he wouldn't have legitimacy and it would create a whole entire conflict and everyone would question if he was actually the Holy Roman Emperor because this guy had no power to do that.
Exactly. Yes, that is literally the problem here.
Oh my gosh. I love this kind of drama.
Yes, there's a lot of drama here. It just immediately goes into it. Okay, so Rome, right, at this time, it's in basically a state of open warfare between varying different noble factions. Exactly as you talked about with Pope John, what was going on in this time is that the papacy and Rome in general was not nearly as peaceful as it is today in the transitions of power. The papacy, the Pope, was essentially something that was controlled by different noble families. And they kept on for years cycling between the same noble families for who would end up being in charge. And there was outright warfare that was going on between 3 candidates over who was actually in charge. There was a Pope that ruled at St. Peter's. There was another at the Lateran and a third at St. Mary Major. And 2 of them, one of them being Benedict IX, who was one of the sons of the Counts of Tusculum, and the other being Sylvester III of the Crescenzi clan. They were like literally rival families that wanted to take over the entire papacy. They were big players in the whole nobility scene of Rome. The third guy, though, he's a little interesting. This is Gregory VI, and his situation is really weird because, I kid you not, he literally had purchased the title from Benedict IX 2 years earlier.
Okay, I loved when they would literally just sell the title. Because, you know, if I existed in a time where I could potentially buy it, I did cover that though. It was the guy, I think he sold it to his father-in-law or something, but I would sell it too. But the thing is, he did take it back.
Yes.
After he sold it, he took it back and then he lost it again. And he was messy. He was so messy.
Yeah, the whole thing that, for anyone who's unfamiliar with this case, what ends up happening in the case of Benedict IX and with Gregory is that, so he bought it from him in good faith. And what that means is that he didn't actually have the money to be able to pay Benedict for his title. It was pretty much a promise of like, hey, once I'm, in charge, I will pay you.
I think it was Benedict the 11th. Sorry.
Oh yeah, because that's a later one. This is another one that happened.
Okay.
This happens multiple times.
Jesus Christ. Nobody named Benedict or Gregory should be Pope. It is law.
Literally, early church history is hilarious in just how broken so many things are. I find this stuff absolutely hilarious.
Did you write about that one guy who he chose the name Pope Julius, not after the previous Pope Julius, but after Julius Caesar?
No, you told me about it. You told me about it, but I do not have that in here because it's not part of the investiture.
Damn it.
So, okay. What ends up happening here is that each one of these guys holds a specific part of the city. And you're going to wonder, okay, wait, what the hell? Why does Benedict control part of the city when he was supposed to have had the title of Pope bought by Gregory already? Well, we're going to get into that. So Henry goes and meets Gregory at Piacenza, I think is how I would say that for the title for the place. And he was received with full honors. At this time, he decides that a synod is going to occur at Sutri, which is a place north of Rome that is supposed to be beyond the city where things are going to be significantly less violent. Before an assembly, Gregory went and testified that he had, quote, in all good faith and simplicity, purchased the papacy from Pope Benedict IX in 1044. After the departure of Benedict, the Bishop of Sabina had also declared himself Pope as Sylvester III.
Oh yeah, Gregory, Benedict, and Sylvester. And poor Henry VIII was like, who the fuck is Pope?
Yeah. So here's the thing, though. Because of this whole dispute that would end up breaking out over the course of who was actually in charge and what was happening, Benedict never got his money. So Gregory couldn't get him his money, which meant that Benedict ended up coming back and instead saying that he was still Pope.
In my thing, they said that it was because he wanted to sell it because he was going to marry his cousin. But then his cousin turned him down. So he came back and he was like, no, I still want to be Pope.
Yeah, and apparently he never got his money anyway.
Oh, shoot. And his cousin turned him down for marriage. You would think back in the day, there weren't many options for marriage, right? So like if your own cousin was like, okay, I'll marry you. And then they said no. Oh, my God.
Literally loveless and poor, got no maidens.
Got no maidens.
Got no maidens.
Guess I'll be Pope. At least he had a fallback plan, you know?
Yes. So this council, okay, it goes and summons the three different popes, right? And naturally, they're anti-popes at this point. Like there is no real legitimate pope, it seems. And both Sylvester and Gregory attend this. The claims of all three popes being the pope are very quickly dismissed. Like there's no way that they're going to be able to regard any of these guys as legitimate. Sylvester gets stripped of his rank and he gets exiled to a monastery. Gregory ends up resigning with his words being, and I quote, I, Gregory, servant of the servants of God, do hereby adjudge myself to be removed from the pontificate of the Holy Roman Church because of the enormous error by which simonical impurity has crept into and vitiated my election. Meaning, because he literally bought the position, this was something that was deemed to be simony, something that was not allowed by church law. And thus, yeah, he was not going to be legitimate. And the council ends on December 23rd. A form of the council was then repeated in Rome the following day, which would completely dismiss Benedict. Henry then goes and fixes things by selecting his own confessor, the Bishop Suigadir, I think is how I would say the name. It's the Bishop of Bamberg to be installed as Pope, and he gets the name Clement II, which, fun fact, I'm going to say this in here. This is hilarious when I looked into this. That guy, Benedict, he comes back again and tries to renew his claim on the papacy in 1047, literally that same year when Clement II died, which was a year after he was put in power in the first place.
But it didn't last long, though, because Henry VIII drove him away. He was like, get out.
Did not work at all. So, okay.
Also, the Pope that they installed died shortly after that 1047 time frame, though.
Yes.
But Benedict didn't become Pope a fourth time, although it would have been cool. It would have been cool if he did.
Yeah, so none of it really worked out for any of them. There was a lot of rapid changes in power, which is what happens in a medieval period when it's a bunch of really old men that get elected into a position.
No, it was literally one guy became Pope, and I think it was something insane. 2 days later, he was dead. That's how bad it was.
Yup. So, okay. 3 consecutive successors to Clement II. You had Damasus II, Leo IX, and Victor II. They all get selected by Henry III from a pool of loyal German bishops, people that were specifically going to be German and loyal to him as heads of the church. And they would rule essentially until 1057, which is not really a long time. By the time that Henry III would die in 1056, the Holy Roman Emperor, and from that, the empire, was pretty much supreme over the church and papacy. This was something that was undeniable. The secular control of everything, that was absolute. The empire controlled the church's highest office. Which brings us then to the 11th century reforms. Because at the time that all of this is going on, in the early 11th century, there is a reform movement, one of the early ones here within the church, or I guess middle ones within the church, that is trying to fix things. And by fix things, I mean not have it so that a emperor or king can just waltz in and go, hey, you didn't let me do this thing that I wanted to do, so you can no longer be bishop. What they wanted to do, and this was a movement led by the papacy and supported by a bunch of prominent church figures, was remove the church from being dependent upon the secular institutions, from removing secular interference, from allowing the papacy as God's representative on earth with the Pope to actually be superior over other secular rulers. The papal claims of authority over monarchs and lords is something that would specifically come, at least in part, from the donation of Constantine, which, oh my God, do I need to explain this for a second? And I think that, Gabby, if you are not familiar with this exact document, I had a teacher, a professor back in college, that put this, it's my favorite way that I have ever seen anything phrased with any kind of historical document. This, I'm trying to remember the exact wordings of what it was that he did.
Was it Dr. Tubbs?
Yes, it was Dr. Tubbs.
Oh my God, you never shut about Dr. Tubbs. You should check in with him.
I should check in with him. I wonder if I could get him on the podcast.
You taught me so much. And now I torture my wife with that knowledge that you gave me.
I should send him a message and invite him onto the podcast. That could be fun. My old history professor. Y'all would love that. So, okay. The donation of Constantine was a medieval forgery. It was a forgery of a document dated to the 8th century that claimed that it was an original 4th century document in which the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, the Constantine that converted the empire to Christianity, that he granted supreme authority and spiritual power to the church over secular rulers.
So over the king.
Over the kings. The document claims that in the year 315 or to 317, Constantine was cured of leprosy by Pope Sylvester I. And in gratitude for this, he surrendered his power and the lands to the Pope. And the Pope then generously gave that power back, which allowed the emperor to actually rule.
Did Constantine have leprosy?
No, there's literally
so they
no
were just lying.
It was straight up lies.
This is genius, honestly.
Straight up lies. And the story behind this for how this whole document even comes about in the first place is freaking hilarious. So, okay. And I'm going to kind of try to explain part of this, at least how Dr. Tubb had explained it in here. The donation of Constantine was most likely written and then used to coerce Pepin the Short, who was the king of the... Yes, I know, epithets. I freaking love epithets.
Stephen the Short?
I am average. Thank you very much.
The Short?
Slightly above average.
Okay, you're not 6 foot. You're like 5'11".
I am 5'11".
Okay, that's like that's the disappointing number because you were close, but not close enough.
Gee, thanks.
I have nothing against height. I just have to make fun of you for that one.
Okay.
Sorry to anyone who's 5'11". I love you. Mwah.
Anyway, so this thing was likely written in order to convince Pepin the Short to give the lands that he had conquered from the Lombards to the church under Pope Stephen II. And so what happened is, right, is that the Pope asks Pepin for help because the Lombards are basically trying to take everything over there around the papacy, and he wants to drive them from the lands. Pepin comes down with an army and completely shatters them. And the way Tubb explained it is that he goes, "Oh, thank you so much for your help. Thank you for this. I'm so eternally grateful. And guess what? By this document that we've actually found here, buried in the vault." Oh, wait, ink is still wet. Shake, 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 shake. Yes, by this document, ancient document, 300, 400 years old that we have found, we have supreme authority, basically. I'm not saying it exactly, and he explained it so much better. The whole class, I still remember that point, was laughing their asses off. But that's basically what happened, right?
Yes.
Sure. This donation was written specifically to convince him to come down and help. And then after Pepin died, it was also used again, which didn't really work to nearly the same degree, but they tried with Pepin's son, Charlemagne.
So they just kept trying to scam people.
Yeah, it was used as a document specifically in order to be able to coerce the feudal lords who Pepin literally could not read. He was completely illiterate. So this document, this wet document that is being waved in front of his face, he has no freaking idea what it says.
So guys, this makes War of the Barons so much more real. Okay. So guys, we did a War of the Barons LARP event in South Carolina that was hosted by Felon Fair. And Stephen was a baron. So if you were a baron and you weren't part of the church, you could not read.
Yeah.
Okay. So while we're on this trip, all of the church, like I was part of the church, we have to like translate for them, write for them, make contracts. And all they had to do was like squiggle their name because they couldn't read or write. And I wrote Steve a love letter, the nun that I am. And I give it to him. And we're in a group of people. I'm like, trying to be all cute because we're doing, what is the fancy writing? Calligraphy. We were doing calligraphy with like literally ink and parchment paper. And I pass him this note, to my baron. And he holds it up, first of all. And it was inappropriate. He holds it up and he goes, "I can't read this." And so the abbess, literally the head mother of the church, comes over and is like, "I can translate for you." When I tell you I almost died. Sorry, I feel like it was kind of relevant to the story and you all needed to hear that. And if you want to see what the letter says, I will put it's on my Instagram. Just go to the War of the Barons. It was very inappropriate.
Yeah. So that pretty much was true for all this. Pepin could not read. His son Charlemagne also could not read. Now, Charlemagne couldn't be convinced to nearly the same degree, but he was still going to be the champion of the church. And this is something that the church would continuously use over the course of the next 600-700 years. 800 years to prove their supreme authority until it was eventually proven to be a forgery by the priest and scholar Lorenzo Valla in literally the year 1439. So this document from 750 AD was used for a whopping 700 years to convince people before they finally went back and looked at it and went, "Hey, wait, hold on, guys.
We've been bamboozled.
This is fake."
I feel like they said bamboozled, but okay.
So yes, this is the reason why, if you've ever heard the term the Papal States, right, where the Pope is literally a ruler that rules over lands across central Italy, that is what would happen. Like this land was supposedly granted that he would have the ability to rule this. But anyway, the church and its people, according to the reformers, they over time had become oppressed by the varying different German kings, the varying different Franks, the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, all these different people here since the time of Constantine, that these secular rulers had forced control of ecclesiastical property and had kicked them out of their office. They could do whatever they wanted, and that this was not how it was supposed to be, that they didn't actually have the authority. They targeted specifically the investiture issue that was facing here. Anything that was related to secular powers being able to intervene within the church. And in particular, the thing that they hated the most from this was the practice of simony, as well as marriage of the clergy, something that specifically was already prohibited by church law. Like, you were not supposed to be able to do it, but there was very little control that the church could actually implement. See, the whole thing with clerical marriage is that at this time, it wasn't necessarily Catholicism just yet. It was Christianity, but what we would think of as like the Roman Catholic Church doesn't really properly exist until after the schism. And so there are a number of different priests and other people that would literally go and get married. And they would do this. And it's not a good idea for a priest to be able to get married in a noble society that potentially a priest could get married to some noble's child, and then from there get
power.
Get literally power, and also wrapped up in the noble's affairs.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
If you were a priest and I was just, some girl, would you marry me?
No, I would take my vows and everything very seriously. That's the thing. If I've promised to specifically do something, no.
Steve, you can't not marry me.
Yes, I can. Gabby.
So okay.
Were you not the one that made the video in which you claimed to be a bride of Christ and you pushed me away?
But if we were transported back in time and then you were unfortunately
forced to be in the church or something,
turned into a priest, you wouldn't marry me. I literally wrote you a love letter as a nun at our LARP event.
No, Gabby, you changed things around here. You asked if we were back in time. That's assuming that I would be born in that time period, and I have the same convictions I do now.
No, I mean, let's.
No, you're changing the goalpost to this.
Would the time travel change your answer?
Yeah, because I don't know what circumstances would have me involve a priest. I'm assuming I'm only doing it and then leaving the church.
If you grew up in that time period, right?
Yeah.
You will not marry me, but if you time travel back, you will marry me.
Yes.
That's kind of iffy. You're not really consistent about your principles, are you? Where's the integrity?
You bastard.
Anyway, continue.
You bastard. Why do you do these things to me?
I had some free time.
Okay. Anyway, the other thing was simony, which was literally, as I said, the sale of ecclesiastical positions. This was something that was heavily criticized for leading to large-scale immorality within the church, because you could literally buy your position. You could become a very powerful bishop through paying enough money. And simony was a very common practice in medieval Europe, especially within all the different feudal societies, in which if you had a person that was newly invested in their position as a church official, they would want to repay the person who had appointed them to that position. Sometimes this was literally in the form of money, so that's where it would actually be payment, or it would be for political favors. Like, you put me in this position and I will literally do whatever it is that you want. That sort of thing. That whole thing goes way beyond what church law was supposed to allow. And as a result of this subversion, simony was very heavily rallied against over the course of the 11th century by these popes, by Clement II and Leo IX, that this was one of the, again, major causes of corruption. So, okay, the 11th century popes, which included those being appointed by Henry III, they really wanted to fix these issues. And Pope Leo IX actively wanted to codify law. Like, he wanted to, remember what I said, that Christianity at this time was not nearly as structured as it would later be. There was a lot of different variants around. He specifically wanted to structure Christianity, as there was too many beliefs and heresies that were all around it that could lead to greater issues, that it wouldn't lead to nearly as much papal control. So he propped up the papacy as being the sole judge on Christian doctrine. No king could decide what was Christian or not, or what was true theology. No one else could, nor could any of these other varying little religious movements around the parts of Western Europe. No, it was specifically the papacy that had the sole authority to do this, and that is what they were pushing. These actions, of course, naturally pissed off the Byzantine emperors who, for centuries had literally seen themselves as the true rulers of Christianity.
I had a question. So why couldn't the king? Because the king had the biggest armies, right? The popes at this point did not. So why couldn't the king just be like, I'm actually the ruler of the religion now, and then, threaten them with violence? I don't know. Just a thought.
Great question.
Because that's what I would do. I just shut this down, man. It's getting messy.
Just wait until we get to talk about Henry IV, and you're going to see exactly what happens. Is that when you reject the Pope, literally, here's the thing about feudal societies, Gabby. It is a top-down structure of a pyramid. And the problem is that you would think that in a pyramid, the bigger the base, the more stable it is. But it was always a case where the nobility and people under you in the pyramid are constantly trying to chip away at the top and around themselves in order to climb the social ladder higher. They want more authority. They want more independence. They want more everything. So if they have the opportunity to go against someone on religious grounds, they're going to do so. And that's exactly what is going to end up happening, and we're going to be talking about. So, okay. In response to Henry III's installation of popes back during his imperial reign, Nicholas II, who was, again, one of these big reformer popes, he issued a papal bull in 1059, specifically outlawing secular interference in the appointment of popes by assigning the authority of papal selection exclusively to an electoral assembly of 7 bishops, which, can you guess what the name of this is?
No.
The College of Cardinals.
Okay.
So the thing that exists to this very day, the thing that elects the popes, right?
Yeah.
This came into existence specifically because the papacy was freaking pissed of all the kings, or really the emperor, continuously interfering and appointing whatever popes they wanted.
That's so funny because in my episode, one of the guys, he was buddy with the College of Cardinals, and I was like, oh, that's so crazy. Why did he think being friends with the College of Cardinals will make him Pope? Well, now I know that.
Now you know. So, all right. This happens, right? And the papal reform movement effectively surges after the installation of Pope Gregory VII. This guy was a huge defender of church authority. He wanted to protect the church from secular powers over the course of his entire life, and he fought for this hard. He would continuously try to reform papal superiority and make sure that it was going to be the thing that was going to be the leader of the church and not, the emperor. The policies that he would end up putting forth, these are the things that would end up becoming known as the Gregorian Reforms, from the name, Gregory. So Gregory and his supporters were especially concerned with, what had been a problem here before with everyone else, lay investiture. And they wanted to challenge that concept as papal imperial tensions were only increasing. In 1074, Gregory VII, who did not want to compromise at all in the fact that the church was supposed to be superior over the secular world, he asserted that church officials could only be installed by the Pope and demanded that any secular rulers, whether they are a count, a duke, a king, or an emperor, it does not matter, they had to obey this policy. The following year, he would go and write his Dictus Papae, which is a list of 27 statements that would define the powers of the papacy. And from this, he would declare the church was superior to the state. The Pope was supreme over both. He was entitled to reject bishops and kings if either of them were unfit for office. He had supreme authority. Now, naturally, of course, the secular rulers didn't really care about this. And for Henry IV, the young son of Henry III, he didn't. He did not like this one bit. And the thing is, it didn't really matter to him. He ignored it. Once the whole regency issue was resolved in 1065, since he became king, technically speaking, when his dad died when he was only 5 years old, Henry IV would then face constant challenges and revolts all over his kingdom, most notably in Saxony and northern Italy. And these were all revolts against him trying to centralize authority specifically under him. The big way that the emperor would control things in this time, as we've already talked about, was specifically through investiture and simony and political patronage, marriage, these kinds of things. Henry would only make the papal-imperial tensions worse when he would install new archbishops in Fermo, Milan, and Spoleto in 1075, which pissed off the Pope so much that he threatened Henry with excommunication. Henry didn't care, though. He knew that, all these things happen, that even with the Pope threatening to excommunicate him, this was just another local revolt. This was just another challenge to his kingship, like everything else. So he goes and assembles an imperial host, something of imperial supporting bishops and clergymen at the Synod of Worms in January of 1076. And there, he and the assembly renounce their allegiance to the Pope and call for his abdication. They basically say that he, Gregory VII, is a false pope. And in response to this, Gregory goes and excommunicates Henry.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Here's the thing about excommunication, and you studied a lot of this here when you were looking at the thing for your episode, I'm sure.
And by study, I asked you.
Okay. For anyone who's unfamiliar with what happens with excommunication, you are basically kicked out of the church. And in the medieval world,
you can't be forgiven anymore. Like, you don't get any more grace from God.
Yeah. You will not be able to get into heaven. No communion, no nothing. Everything is supposed to be kind of done through the lens of God and the church. So that means that all of the vassals, all of the merchants, literally anyone and everyone across the empire is forbidden by the church from being able to obey the German king.
Which is so interesting, though, like how they took excommunication so seriously. Because have you guys been to a Catholic church? You know what I'm saying? Recently, I'm not Catholic. And when I went to church with Steve, who is Catholic, you can't do communion. And everyone just kind of stares at you if you don't know what you're doing. So I could not imagine back in the day not being able to partake in the religion would be terrible.
The big thing that would happen with it is it's not even just you. If you were excommunicated, if a ruler gets excommunicated, what would end up happening later on as it would develop and the papacy would gain more power is that they would outright stop the bishops from being able to give communion to anyone within the kingdom.
Really?
Which means that not only was the ruler destined to go to hell, essentially, like they would not be able to perform rites, they would not be able to do anything that was necessary for the afterlife, that this means that all of the regular people, the nobles, everyone within that society was damned.
Did that happen every time or just sometimes throughout history? Because
I'm actually curious as to how many excommunications there have been, but there have been quite a number.
Because I looked into excommunications because I wanted to write on excommunications at first. And then a lot of the things that I was reading were saying, oh, the king couldn't do it. So he lost the people's respect, typically.
Yeah. It wasn't just the loss of respect, though. That's a really light way of phrasing it. He lost their support entirely because he was literally the thing that was standing between them and salvation at that point, in their eyes. That's how they view it religiously.
That's terrible.
Yeah. So again, Christians across Europe were prohibited from obeying him, and a lot of his supporters who had supported him for years retracted their allegiances and instead threatened to overthrow him. Henry's political crisis would intensify when a group of these influential lords of imperial territories would issue him an ultimatum demanding that Henry needed to submit to the Pope or he had to abdicate his throne. And over the next several months, he would face increasing and significant opposition within the kingdom, and he would have to maneuver his politics and public appearances to try and say, no, I am not going to give into this. I am strong. I am great. I will not have to listen to the Pope because I am the true authority of Christians, essentially. And it didn't really work because Gregory supported the ultimatum and threatened the emperor, not with having the next emperor be his son and by, by blood, by hereditary succession. Instead, the next ruler would be elected, and that the nobles would then have the authority and ability to do this. And so naturally, as nobles go, as you know very well how it is that they act, they're going to want to depose the king in order to be able to take more power for themselves. And so Henry IV, being faced with a very real possibility that he was going to be deposed in just a few months, and with very little support all across Germany, he decided that he was going to have to do something drastic. He was going to go to Italy directly. And while most of the passes over the Alps were being guarded by his opponents, since there were little revolts that were all over the countryside here for him, he managed to find one that could be bribed in order to allow him to get through. And so in December, with a group of only around 50 people, including his wife and son, like literally his baby, his infant son, he began to move southwards. Chroniclers would report that the winter of 1076 through the 7th was one of the harshest they had ever seen. And Henry had to literally pull a Hannibal and cross the Alps. So Lampert of Hersfield is where is one of the more reliable sources that we were able to find here that talks specifically about this incident. And it goes, and I quote, "He therefore hired certain natives of the region who were skilled and well accustomed to the rugged summits of the Alps. They were they were to lead his entourage over the steep mountains and the huge mass of snow, and to smooth the unevenness of the path by whatever means they could, and for those who were following. When, with these men as their guides, they had with great difficulty reached the summit of the mountain, there was no possibility of advancing further, for the mountainside was precipitous, and so they said slippery because of the icy cold, and seemed to rule out entirely any hope of descent. In that situation, the men tried to overcome every danger using their own strength, now crawling on their hands and feet, clinging to the shoulders of their guides, and also occasionally, when a foot slipped on an icy surface, falling and rolling down for a considerable distance. At last, with difficulty, and for a time at serious risk of their lives, they reached the plains. The queen and the other women who were in her service were placed in the hides of oxen, and the guides who had been hired to lead the expedition dragged them down behind them. Some of the horses they lowered down the mountainside by means of certain contrivances, others they spantled and dragged down, but many of these died while they were being dragged down the mountain, and very many were crippled. Very few were able to escape the peril safe and sound. So literally, they had to climb over the mountains. And in the process...
And he took his kid?
Oh yeah, he took his literal baby. And they lost like a whole bunch of their horses.
Was the baby okay?
Yes.
All good.
So news of his arrival soon started to spread around Italy, and the Pope was afraid, thinking, oh God, the emperor is literally here. He has brought an army. Maybe he's here to capture me. Maybe he's here to kill me. We don't know. So the emperor did have a lot of supporters amongst the Italian nobility, which would allow him to raise an army to attack the Pope potentially. So a woman by the name of Countess Matilda took Gregory to her castle at Canossa, where they would have to wait and see what Henry was planning on doing. And on January 25th, 1077, with a blizzard fully raging around him, Henry would arrive at the gates of Canossa. And here is Gregory's own account of exactly how that happened. It was written just a few weeks after the incident. Quote, "Finally, he came in person to Canossa, where we were staying, bringing with him only a small retinue and manifesting no hostile intentions. Once arrived, he presented himself at the gate of the castle, barefoot and clad only in wretched woolen garments, beseeching us with tears to grant him absolution and forgiveness. This he continued to do for 3 days, until all those about us were moved to compassion at his plight, and interceded for him with tears and prayers. Indeed, they marveled at our hardness of heart, some even complaining that our actions savored rather of heartless tyranny than of chastening severity. At length, his persistent declarations of repentance and supplications of all who were there with us overcame our reluctance, and we removed the excommunication from him and received him again into the bosom of the Holy Mother Church."
It's like the prodigal son. Is that what it was called?
Yeah. So literally, the emperor shows up with his entourage, crying and pleading outside of the gates in not like the fine dress of a king, literally in woolen cloth, like just the cheapest, roughest cloth that you could imagine, showing that he was repenting to try and get forgiveness. And so before he was absolved of his sins and had the excommunication removed from him, Henry had to promise Gregory that he was going to be better, quote, and gave the following oath. "I, Henry, King, promise to satisfy the grievances which my archbishops, bishops, dukes, counts, and other princes of Germany or their followers may have against me within the time set by Pope Gregory and in accordance with his conditions. If I am prevented by any sufficient cause from doing this within that time, I will do it as soon as that I may. Further, if Pope Gregory shall desire to visit Germany or any other land, on his journey thither, his sojourn there, and his return thence, he shall not be molested or placed in danger of captivity by me or anyone whom I can control. This shall apply to his escort and retinue of all who come and in his service. Moreover, I will never enter into any plan for hindering or molesting him, but will aid him in good faith and to the best of my ability if anyone else opposes him. So yeah, that whole section here, like everything it is that I described, it's a whole series of quotes from the different chronicles that are talking about this. He shows up for this castle, crying his heart out, begging for forgiveness, right? And he gets it. And in exchange, basically has to promise he is not going to try to overthrow the Pope and kidnap him like had previously happened with a whole bunch of different popes.
I mean, honestly, that's a fair exchange.
It's a fair argument, right? Once that happens, the Pope goes and holds a mass. He gives communion to Henry. The whole excommunication is lifted and they have dinner together. And according to another chronicler about this, the emperor was in such a bad mood during this time that he refused to touch his food and just grinded his fingernails the entire time on the table.
Why was he in a bad mood?
Because he literally just had to give up all. Mind you, this is a guy.
He had to grovel?
Yes, he had to grovel.
That was his fault.
I know, but this is a guy. This is a guy who has been king, emperor. He has been the ruler since he was 5 years old.
Ooh.
He has known literally nothing but power. That is him entirely.
And he was
literally just being
violently
in charge.
humbled. Like they snatched his wig.
Yes, very much so. And with the final blessing, he went back home with his supporters. The problem is that these actions, this whole thing taking place, was going to completely shift how medieval politics was going to function. It was going to completely change the balance of power. By submitting to the Pope, Henry had acknowledged that the Pope had the right to depose secular monarchs. Before, this wasn't really a thing.
What?
Remember, what he said is that the Pope was going to support the people trying to overthrow the emperor, that the Pope would call for the emperor to be elected, not have it passed down.
So how do they check the power of the Pope after all this?
Exactly.
Because there is no way the Pope could be like the most powerful man and it not go awry. Because we saw what happened with the king being the most powerful man and it went awry.
That is precisely what happens.
Well, the thing is, we know for a fact that these popes weren't as godly as they thought. Because if you look at the papal scandals,
Yeah. Which for anyone who hears that, that's a patron exclusive episode for you, right? I think we said that in here.
Yeah, that's a patron exclusive episode for the Mystery of Everything podcast.
Yeah. So you all subscribe to our Patreon. I hope you do, at least in the first place. You should check out theirs, which I may leave a link down to.
It's new. We're working on it. We're new to the podcasting on our own without Steve.
But yeah, Gab, you're entirely right. That is precisely what ends up happening. Is it's going to create a lot of problems, and you'll see this as time goes on once the Black Death hits, which is a whole other thing that we could talk about. But that's not in this episode. Either way, Henry does pretty much from this inadvertently acknowledge the right of the Pope to be able to depose secular monarchs, and it strengthens the claim that the church is superior over secular powers, that the church is superior over kings.
And emperors.
Yeah. Despite Henry submitting to the Pope, though, it didn't cause his enemies to go away. The anti-imperial faction within the empire denounced the German king and instead went and elected a guy called Rudolf of Rheinfelden, who was the Duke of Swabia, as Henry's replacement. This would launch a civil war called the Great Saxon Revolt, and Henry would have to fight this and then gradually start to try and gain back support from among the varying different German nobles and bishops. But when he did so, he would go and follow and do the same tactics with lay investiture, simony, and everything else, and would once again get excommunicated.
Are you kidding me?
In 1080.
At this point in time, if I were him, I would simply plot the demise, unfortunately, of the Pope,
Yeah.
you've played Crusader Kings because
Oh, Gabby, that's pretty much what happens here, because he's not going back and supplicating himself before the Pope this time. No. Very soon after this, that Rudolph guy, he dies. And so now Henry's army doesn't need to deal with that. Instead, they march down south and launch a siege of Rome.
Okay, now he's speaking my language.
Now,
I don't support his actions. I'm just saying, logically, since he was going to do what he wanted to do anyway, to accomplish his goals, right? He needed to get rid of the Pope.
Exactly.
I'm not supporting getting rid of the Pope. I'm just saying, logically, he needed to do it.
So Rome is under siege. Henry then deposes Gregory VII as Pope and instead installs Wibert of Ravenna as Pope Clement III, and subsequently after that is then confirmed as the Holy Roman Emperor by this new Pope that literally serves him. The siege of Rome then succeeds in 1083, and Gregory VII is held captive for the following year until a very interesting character from history that I do need to talk about him, but I've talked about a lot of European nobility history here this time, so we're going to have to do that at a later point. Robert Guiscard, the Norman Duke of Apulia, Calabria, and Sicily, the guy that would basically create the Norman kingdom. Yes, that's right. For anyone who's confused, the Normans, as in the same people that invaded from northern France, conquered England and created the modern state of England with like William the Conqueror. Another group of Normans had gone south into the Mediterranean and conquered Sicily. So yeah, that's how that happened. He went and forced Henry's army north and sacked the city in 1084, freeing the Pope. Gregory, though, would remain deposed. He wouldn't actually end up having authority, would flee in exile in southern Italy, where he would die in 1085. So he never actually got to come back to power. Henry would in turn continue to practice lay investiture, simony, and everything else throughout his kingdom. And when he would do this, it would slowly build back his control over imperial territory. But, just remember, there's always a but. Yes.
Yeah, there is.
The problem is that there were still a number of rulers that resisted him. The rulers of Bavaria, Saxony, Tuscany, more, they still opposed him. And when Henry invaded northern Italy again in 1090 to stop an uprising by another anti-imperialist faction or coalition that was being led by Matilda of Tuscany and Welf IV of Bavaria and the Gregorian successor Pope Urban II, their armies managed to stop him. And in 1093, they even went back and assisted the rebellion of Henry's eldest son, Conrad, who rebelled against his father. The marriage of Matilda and Welf, though, Welf V, who was going to be the husband of Matilda, that marriage was dissolved in 1095, which broke the alliance. That gave Henry the opportunity to reconcile his differences with Welf IV. Conrad's revolt would end up collapsing in 1096, and Henry would, at least from this, even though he was weakened, regain some of his influence over the following years. But ultimately, he would end up abdicating when he was forced to do so in 1105 after his younger son betrayed him, his chosen heir, Henry V. And it's this Henry that things are going to kind of finish under. Because upon the ascension to the imperial throne after his father's abdication, Henry V would receive the support of the German nobility and even the reform-minded rulers within the empire. But the tension that would exist between the empire and the papacy was still something that was going to continue. That did not change. Pope Paschal II, like his other reformer people that had come before him, he still wanted independence. And so he rejected the right of this Henry V to practice lay investiture, naturally. In the year 1111, following a failed compromise over lay investiture, Henry did something that he was never going to be able to recover from. Do you know what he did, Gabby?
What'd he do?
He kidnapped the Pope.
Wow.
And when he did so, he demanded that the Pope acknowledge his right to invest his own bishops, like that he could practice lay investiture, and to crown him as Holy Roman Emperor. Paschal would submit to Henry, and when he would do so, at first, this seems like, okay, that everything is peaceful, right? The emperor finally succeeded. No.
No.
The church council that would follow after this event said that the events that would take place, that Pascal's submission to Henry, that was nullified because this was all done under duress with him being imprisoned. So that could not be legitimate. Henry's actions of kidnapping the Pope would also take the people that previously had supported him, the German bishops and the clergy, they turned against him. And that is something that gave the secular rulers, the ones in Saxony and other areas that wanted to get more independence for themselves, they now had a legitimate reason to reject Henry's imperial control over their lands and resist him. That disagreement over investiture and the tension that would be created between the HRE and the papacy, that was going to continue on, even as the Pope was going to actually fix those issues and not have to deal with that with France and England and other territories. The HRE, though, that was going to continue on for a long more time. Resolutions to that conflict would be proposed throughout the decades of conflict, but it specifically always failed at balancing the spiritual and secular role of bishops, what was going to happen. Until finally, in 1121, some ground was gained and a compromise finally would occur, something known as the Concordat of Worms. This would then occur in 1122. That agreement between Henry V, his vassals, the Pope, all of this eliminated lay investiture. That the emperor was no longer going to be able to just appoint popes, or not appoint popes, but be able to appoint bishops, that bishops were to be chosen according to canon law and free from simony. That they could only be installed by, quote, the relevant archbishop accompanied by 2 other bishops. The emperor maintained the authority to still invest bishops with secular authority and property, making them vassals of the lay rulers. But the feudal installment would carry no religious significance, meaning there was no ability for that bishop to be able to do religious actions specifically that the emperor directed. They would have to still follow church law specifically. And here's the thing. The emperor still had the right to give them property. He still had the right to give them secular authority. And from that, the emperor still maintained some power, but he was greatly weakened. Because here's the thing, Gabby. By giving the bishops land, by giving them secular authority in a specific region, the emperor is not tying the bishops to the emperor. He's tying them to the land. And so while temporarily they're going to be more loyal to that emperor, as time goes on, they are going to be in that area in their own power base with more loyalty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that a thing where the whole thing where they couldn't have kids with people became an issue because bishops wanted more land or something?
Correct. Yeah, it was a big thing here. And
I vaguely remember you lecturing me on that one night when I was trying to go to bed. It was like 2 a.m. I was trying to lie down and you were like, oh yeah, and bishops had blah, 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 blah. But then they had issues with land and then the church had land and I don't remember it exactly. I was falling asleep.
Yeah. So the change that we're talking about here is something that would benefit a lot of the dukes and lords, the local lords, who they were going to be able to influence the ecclesiastical property within their realm. The thing that previously had been directly controlled by the emperor.
Wouldn't that decentralize the church a little bit?
Yeah. Well, not exactly, no, because the Pope was the one who would get to still directly appoint the bishops. But the power and financial base of those bishops was directly tied to the land around them, which would increase local influence. And do you know what that means for the Holy Roman Empire?
What?
This is where it starts to become less holy, less Roman, less empire.
Is this what leads to the Magna Carta?
No, that's England.
Huh.
Yeah, but it's a similar kind of concept of the nobles not wanting the king to be able to just order them to do whatever, that it had to work with, like, that the nobles have a degree of rights. And in this case, the more rights that were stripped away from the emperor, the more decentralized that the thing became. And although the Holy Roman Empire would not really begin to decentralize for a couple, 100 more years, this was really the beginning of that long process. So it is that the investiture controversy would completely change the entire balance of power in Europe. And that, my friends, is the end. Everyone, thank you very much for listening. This has been Stakui with the History of Everything podcast. I appreciate all of you for joining in. If you want to check out our trips that we're going to be leading here to Peru, to Germany, and also the updates that we're going to be giving out with regarding Italy, please, by all means, click the links down in the description. Simultaneously, go ahead and check us out on Patreon if you want ad-free episodes, as well as not free bonus episodes, but literally if you want bonus episodes, as that is something that's offered.
Leave us a review. Every time I say leave us a review, you guys leave one person leaves a scathing review of me specifically, and I get that. So if you want to roast me, do that. If you don't want to roast me, don't do that. Do what you want to do.
My friends, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate all of you, and we will see you next time. Goodbye, my friends.
Bye.